Hello and welcome to another Wheel of Time video. Sort of, kind of, not really, but we're going with it. In my previous video about Norse mythology in the Wheel of Time, I mentioned that there could be a link between the dragon reborn Rand and the Viking god of war Tyr. Spoiler warning for Knife of Dream onwards, this is because both legendary heroes lose a hand. There are some other links you could draw upon, such as how Tyr is a god of justice as well as war, similarly to how Rand has to prove himself both a political leader and warrior in the Wheel of Time. But really, it's all about the lost limb. The reason I didn't delve into this particular parallel in my previous video is because whilst writing the script, I realised I had a lot more to say about amputation in legend and pop culture than I initially thought I did. It was a shock to me too, so I decided to make this its own video. Once I began broadening my examples, I began noticing a pattern between dismemberment and character development. But before we start comparing Luke Skywalker to Jaime Lannister, let's go back and look at the legend of Fenrir and how Tyr sacrificed his hand for the good of the gods. Fenrir is one of Loki's 3 children by the giantess Angrboda. His siblings are the world-circling serpent Jormungandr and the half-beautiful, half-corpse goddess of death, Hel, who looks a lot better in the Marvel movies than she does in legend. Does anyone else support the theory that Cate Blanchett is secretly trying to tell us she's an ageless goddess in the roles she chooses? I mean, if you look at them, there's definitely a pattern. Anyway, Fenrir himself was a giant wolf that grew bigger with every passing day. The gods decided amongst themselves that it was probably best to bind the beast before he grew big enough to, I don't know, swallow the sun. But no fetters or chains could prove strong enough to contain Fenrir. Odin sought the help of the dwarves and the elf Skimnir, who created a ribbon-like cord called Geltnir that was said to be unbreakable. The gods goaded Fenrir into letting them bind him by saying it was a test of his strength. However, suspecting treachery, the wolf insisted on one condition, that one of the gods place their hand in his mouth as a show of good faith that they would untie him if he couldn't break free. Tyr was the only god brave enough to volunteer, despite knowing the god's plan and the cost of its success. In the Wheel of Time, Rand loses his left hand when he stumbles into a trap set by Semirog, disguised as the daughter of the Nine Moons. The Forsaken throws a fireball at Rand, and he is unable to grab Saidin in time, and whilst trying to protect Min, has his hand burnt to a crisp. With the similarities between Mat and Odin, Perrin and Thor, it makes sense that an event like this could persuade some readers that there is a link between Rand and Tyr. However, I would argue that Rand losing his hand, particularly at this point in the series, is less about pointing out this parallel and fits into a more common character trope seen in pop culture, that the loss of a limb acts as a sudden precursor to character growth. At this point in the series, Rand's madness has already reached a stage where he no longer trusts himself to wield Saidin, for fear that the voice in his head, Lews Therin, will control it instead. The landing gear has already been deployed for his descent into Crazy Town, and I think it's fair to say after this event it takes a bit of a nosedive. This is all build up for his transformation into Zen Rand at the end of the Gathering Storm, fitting the theory that hand loss is the line of salt before a big shot of character development. I need to stop making drinking analogies in these videos or people are going to think I have a problem. When it comes to amputation, there is one series that stands out above them all, Star with a grand total of, by my count, 17 amputations in the original 6 movies. I didn't feel like going back and watching the sequels. It is what it is. I'm also counting the loss of body parts that wouldn't result in immediate death. So I'm not counting Darth Maul, because getting chopped in half really would kill you. Should kill you. The large pile of severed arms and legs is not just a monument to awesome fight scenes, despite a 10-year-old me judging every Star Wars movie by how often I saw a lightsaber on screen. There is in fact a purpose to all this amputation. In extended Star Wars lore, the act of cutting off just an opponent's sword hand is called chomai, and is basically the ultimate lightsaber flex. Cutting off a larger section of the arm is called chosun, and though not as much of a flex, is still preferable to outright killing your opponent. Scott White argues in his study of legends and popular narratives that severed limbs act as a symbol for lost humanity. He states that humans are often defined in clinical studies by their ability to use tools, language, and form complex societies. The reasoning scans that the loss of a limb reduces a person's ability to use tools and therefore somehow makes them less human. Of course, we know that being an amputee, whether from birth or in later life, in no way makes a person less human. However, it is easy to see how this theory fits in popular culture, especially when looking at villains. Going back to Star Wars, when Anakin arrogantly fails to accept the all-important power of the high ground, he loses both legs and his remaining arm, forcing him to wear the infamous cyborg suit and, as Obi-Wan puts it, become more machine than man. It's therefore implied that the loss of his limbs is therefore connected to his loss of humanity and transformation into the iconic villain. However, I would argue that Anakin actually lost his humanity hours before the battle on Mustafar, when he slaughtered a room full of children. That's the kind of psychological event that creates a monster, an action so irredeemable that they effectively sever themselves from the rest of humanity. I believe that the loss of his arms and legs is purely symbolic. Often in film and TV, it's important to have a visual accompaniment to what's going on in a character's head, and in Star Wars, that's Anakin putting on the suit. White's theory can also be applied to other villains, such as Captain Hook from J.M. Barrie's popular play and novel Peter Pan. Similarly to how the crocodile devoured his original hand, Hook's whole identity is swallowed by the loss of his limb. He becomes obsessed with Peter Pan and getting revenge for the act, and even his original name is forgotten, and he is forever identified by the menacing prosthetic. Whilst looking at heroic or more morally complicated characters, I would adapt White's theory to suggest that severed hands represent a loss of identity instead of humanity. When Luke Skywalker becomes a victim of Cho Mai at the end of Empire Strikes Back, this traumatic event coincides with Daddy Vader's big reveal.
No, I am your father.
Not only has Luke just lost a hand, but also his sense of self. Everything he thought he knew about his life up to this point is suddenly turned upside down. In many cases, the loss of a limb would be succeeded by a period of adjustment. And often in fiction, this physical change is often linked to a mental change for a character. The next time we see Luke in Return of the Jedi, he's very different from the naive farm boy from Tatooine we saw in the previous two films. Similarly to Rand, he appears far more confident and calm. He has mastered his powers and abilities and is able to use them far more effectively to achieve his goals. Another example is Jaime Lannister from A Song of Ice and Fire. From an early age, Jaime was regarded as one of the greatest swordsmen in Westeros. A large portion of his personality was built around his ability to kill another man. So when the brave companions capture and cut off Jaime's sword hand, they're effectively severing that huge part of his identity. This act is what kicks off Jaime's character growth throughout the subsequent books. Despite returning to his family as planned, a part of him both physically and mentally was left behind, and he is forced to reassess his place and purpose in the world. This humbling experience is what leads Jaime to becoming a more morally conscious character, sending Brienne off to fulfill his oath to Catelyn Stark to protect her daughters Arya and Sansa. And remembering how great Jaime's arc is brings back all the frustrated feelings I have for Game of Thrones Series 8, pressing the reset button on his character. Still bitter. Still bitter. To take an example from another hugely popular franchise, in the Marvel Cinematic Universe, Bucky Barnes seemingly dies in Captain America the First Avenger, but turns up in The Winter Soldier as, well, the Winter Soldier. After years of being repeatedly brainwashed and frozen, he no longer remembers who he is. You could almost say that he has lost his identity, and coincidentally, he has also lost an arm that's been replaced by a pretty nifty new robotic one. Roughly a third of the way through Joseph Campbell's heroic journey is a stage called Ordeal, and dismemberment is actually listed as one of the examples. Therefore, it stands to reason that losing a limb has always been associated with character development. In Jaime's case, the loss of his hand is more of a literal loss of identity, as so much of his character was wrapped up in being a great swordsman. In Bucky and Luke's case, the severed limb and subsequent robotic replacement are more of a visual reminder of a more psychological loss of identity and character change. You may have noticed that so far all the examples I've used in this video have been men, And though you could link that to amputation being a metaphor for male fears about castration, I did find one female example that fits the pattern. A couple of weeks ago, while I was researching for this video, I rewatched Toy Story 4 because it's a great movie and the perfect end to Woody's character, and I don't need to justify my decisions to you. Anyway, when we are reintroduced to Bo Peep's character in the film, she is very different, or at least far more developed than the last time we saw her in Toy Story 2. Throughout the series, the toys attach a huge amount of their personality to whichever child plays with them at the time, even going so far as to have their name written on their shoe. They believe that it is their purpose in life to help this child through the stages of development and growing up and being there to support them whenever needed. At the start of the film, Bo Peep is abandoned by her kid, Molly, effectively losing that part of her identity and forcing her to go on a journey to become a more confident and independent character. Oh, and get this, somewhere along the way she also loses a hand. Before people mention it in the comments, I did go back and watch the Pixar short Lamp Life to see if it offered an explanation for the amputation. I don't know why I was expecting to see that in a Disney film, but the broken arm and bandage do act as a reminder that Bo Peep has been through some tough times and come out the other side of it as a stronger character. So to finish off, I don't think that Rand losing his hand in Knife of Dreams is a nod to the Norse god Tyr, but instead plays into a much more common trope in fiction, that the loss of a limb is directly related to sudden character development. I hope you've enjoyed this video, and if you can think of any more examples that fit this theory or disprove this theory, please do let me know in the comments below. Especially if they are female examples, because I would love to hear some more of those. Once again, thank you for watching. Please do like and comment and share this video with, well, anyone who you think would find it interesting, I suppose. I hope you're all having a great day, and I will see you next time.
We are looking at how to pronounce the name of the Midgard serpent in Norse mythology. We are looking at how to pronounce Jormungandr.
Jormungandr.